again, we are in the second lecture of what I'm calling the history behind the New Testament. We want to look at what are the cultural, historical, political, religious, what is the context in which we read our New Testament. The New Testament happened within this fishbowl, and so we want to be aware of the waters that we're going to be swimming in. I want to remind you all again that we're not studying this as a way to prove that the Bible is true. We aren't saying that the Bible is true because we can prove these historical points, but we're saying that the Bible happened in history. It happened with other historical events and figures and dates, and so we want to kind of immerse ourselves in that. So my goal for all of you is that as we're understanding this, and for myself, the goal is that as we're understanding these things, that our resolution in our New Testament screen is the highest it could possibly be. We want to increase the amount of pixels that are in our view of our New Testament understanding. And as we do that, that'll help us understand how to relate to these stories. How can these stories kind of meet us where we're at? How can we meet them where they're at? And we can better live out the call of Jesus Christ as we're doing that. And we'll see why as we move along. So I want to walk you through a bit of nostalgia. If you grew up in the mid-90s, like myself, maybe they did this a little bit before, maybe they're still doing this now, you had to build a diorama. Does anybody remember building dioramas? You would take a shoebox, and you were given some sort of ecological scene or historical scene or something, and you had to create a 3D representation of that thing. And so maybe if you were learning about kind of the water cycle in 4th or 5th grade, and you had to learn that it goes from water to a vapor to then, precipitation, you'd create a little 3D representation of that thing so you could see that this little ecological was a tiny, downscaled 3D version of some sort of, Canadian, Alaskan scene, ecological scene. And so the student who is learning this can understand how do the moose and the beaver relate to each other, and they can kind of get into that little world. And so this is the exercise that I want all of us to go through together. And so this is what I'm calling something I've completely made up, and it's called progressive scaling. And so it's this idea that as we read Scripture, when we first come to the New Testament, we're seeing a picture. And that picture oftentimes is a, low resolution, black and white tube television of what's happening in that story. And that is enough for you to be saved. That is glorious. It is enough for you to understand it and to see the need that Jesus Christ is your Savior, and you can receive that message. But what I hope that we could do in your whole Christian life is that you're increasing the resolution of that thing. It can then go to 1080p, and then it can go to 4K and 8K, and essentially, if you don't understand what that means, it's just the picture keeps getting better and better to the point where if you watch a soap opera and the way that they shoot it, it looks so real. It's kind of creepy. It looks like it's a window and you can go in there and touch it. That's what I want for you when you're reading the New Testament. I want you to get such a good resolution. And so oftentimes when we first come to Christ, our picture is kind of like this flat 2D, kind of cartoonish-esque picture. That's great. That's glorious. I'm not saying that you should not want that. It's enough for you to get saved, once again. But then eventually, as you understand the historical context, the political context of what's going on in the New Testament, it's going to become a little diorama. And it's a little 3D downscaled kind of thing. And you're going, oh, okay, this is how Jesus relates to the Pharisees, and this is how the Pharisees relate to the Sadducees, and there's a dimension to it. You can understand contexts. You can understand distance in a way. And then as you upscale that more, this is from the New York Natural History Museum. This is a giant exhibit of two meese fighting each other, right? And so this is what I want you to be able to have is a world, a variable world that you can kind of step into. You can understand, here's what's going on. Oh, here what the Romans, here's what they look like. Here's what they were trying to accomplish, their motives, their desires. And then here were the Jews. Oh, here's what they wanted. And so as we do this, we're getting a better and better picture. One last analogy, and hopefully this is helpful, is video games. When you first played Mario back in the 80s, you had him in 8-bit. And you had It was this little doot, 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 right? And you could go through and you can go through the levels and it was fun. But it was a thing that you kept there. You couldn't take it with you and you could play it and it was fun. And then you stepped away and you really didn't have Mario in your day-to-day life. Well, then as technology grew and developed, you had the N64. And now it's in 3D. And now you're Mario and you're stepping into that world and you're seeing how big Peach's castle is. And you're going, oh my gosh, I'm really kind of getting a deeper immersion into this thing, but it's still kind of staying there. But now, if you have a Nintendo Switch, you're playing Mario Odyssey and the dimensions and the colors and the stories are so much more grandiose. And you're able to take that thing with you, your Nintendo Switch, everywhere you go, and you can kind of play it and you can see how Mario relates in every scenario of your life, because you can play him over here, you can play him over there, you can do this, you can do that. With your understanding of Scripture, when you first start out, it's the 8-bit. It's cool, it's interesting, it's helpful, it's entertaining, but when you step away, you don't really understand, well, how does that relate to what I'm doing in my day-to-day life? But I want me to get to a point where I'm living, my New Testament understanding is a Nintendo Switch, to where I can carry it with me everywhere I go. And I could play with it, and I understand the context, and it goes with me. My Christianity is with me everywhere I go. And so when I'm seeing political situations here in 2023, I understand that how would it related to those things? Because a lot of times it's the same monster, different shirt. It's the same scenarios, but they just look a little bit different. Does that make sense? So this is why, hopefully this is my motivation. I'm trying to get you on board this train that we're going to be rolling down. So I want you to get to the point where the action is live in living color. You can touch it. You can be scared of the meese. So let's jump into today. Today we're talking about Judaism. And I've completely failed you all, because we could have a 12-week class about first century, Second Temple Judaism. There are so many layers. There's so much history. There's so much. I'm going to give you such a small version of this. I'm going to give you hopefully a little diorama version of this. Does anybody need notes? I'm seeing people crane their neck. If you would like notes, once again, I'll pass those back around. You could look at those. So we're going to look at Judaism, and we're going to look at, once again, the historical realities of those things. So we're going to look at the book of Luke, chapter 3, 1 through 2. And it says this: in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip tetrarch of the region of Iturea, and Trachonitis and Lysanus is the tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. This is just a small portion, then it bleeds into John the Baptist. This jumps into John and his ministry. But if you just look at these 1.5 verses, verse 2 go on. If you look at these 1.5 verses, if you are a historian, you're looking at this and going, Luke, oh, thank you. Thank you so much for the context. Because if you understand each of these things, it pinpoints, it lets you know exactly what's going on, who's in charge, what's happening in that time. So the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius is 29 AD. We know for a fact what year is the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. It's 29 AD. So that is the year that John the Baptist is starting his ministry, that he's coming about and he's preaching in the wilderness. And so then you can go down and you can see, well, who's in charge of Judea? Pontius Pilate. Hopefully that name sounds familiar. Okay, so he's in charge of this kind of sliver. Well, Herod being the tetrarch of Galilee. Okay, so now, where's Jesus from? Well, he's from Galilee. Okay, so tetrarch, what is that? He's kind of this ruler. He's kind of governor in charge of this area. Philip, his brother, Philip. Okay, so Herod has a brother. He's a tetrarch. He's in an area of Iturea and Trachonitis, and you go, I really don't know what that means. And especially Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, you really don't know what that means, because that's not really in our card catalog of New Testament understanding. And then you understand that the high priest is Ananias and Caiaphas. And so you're understanding, okay, this is who's in charge. Here are the dynamics. Here's what's happening. And what I want us to understand, the question that I want us to have in the back of our head all throughout this class, as you're reading the New Testament, are a handful of questions. I want you to ask, who's in charge? Who's in charge here? Who has authority? I want you to ask then, who ought to be in charge? And then finally, how are they to be in charge? How are they to get authority? How are they going to get the authority for themselves? So the question, the ultimate answer, if you're a Roman, is, who's in authority here? Caesar Tiberius. He's the one that's in charge here. He's the one in rule, and he ought to be in rule because he's a demigod. He is divinity. He is a representation of God on earth. And how did he become in charge? Through treachery and through being born in the right time in the right space. If you're a Jew, you're saying, well, Yahweh should be in charge, but he's not really in charge right now. Palestine is not truly under his reign, as it were. It is and it isn't. We understand that as Christians already, but not yet. But he's not really in charge here. There's not Jewish leadership. And how are we going to get that? Well, each different Jewish group is going to try to answer that question themselves. And then if each group is going to have the question that they need to answer. Who's in charge? Who ought to be in charge? And how do we get the person we want to be in charge? So this is, Luke is obsessed with history. As you're reading Luke, you're just going to see over and over again. He's talking to you about people, who was there, who was in charge, what region were they in. He's very much trying to paint a picture for you. So I left you last week with this slide. Antiochus Epiphanes, he took over Palestine from the Ptolemies. There's a Greek empire, so the Greeks are in charge of Palestine. He's in charge of them. He sets up an image, an idol of himself in the temple, Yahweh's temple. He offers sacrifices of pig, swine, which is so unclean, so disgusting, so nasty if you're a Jew. And that is the abomination of desolation. That's that's Daniel chapter 11. We talked about how Alexander the Great was Daniel chapter 8. And so this is prophecy coming to life. This is history happening. And so we left him, and I left you with this brilliant teaser. He's a nailed to be hammered. He's a nailed to be hammered. If you're not sure what that means, let me tell you. I'm going to talk to you briefly, quickly about the Hasmonean dynasty. Does anybody know about the Hasmonean dynasty? They're the priests? Instead of the right priests? Yes. Zadok, yes! Let's switch seats. You come up here. No. So, in addition to that, how do we know about the Hasmoneans? How do we know about, what book? Ben, do you know? Josephus, yes, Josephus tells a lot about that. There's a semi-religious book that we can... The Apocrypha, what books? The Book of Maccabees, right? So these are the Maccabees. So we know about these from, if you're Catholic, you read the book of the Maccabees. The Jews, the first century Jews would have read about the book of the Maccabees. Antiochus is in control. He's forcing Jews left and right to become Greek. He's asking them to sacrifice to gods, to Zeus, and to sacrifice unclean animals on the Jewish altars. Well, a guy named Mattathias, he lives in a small town, I believe it was northeast of Jerusalem. A Seleucid or a Greek official comes into town and says, you all need to offer sacrifices in honor of Antiochus Epiphanes to our gods. And Mattathias is not having any of it. Well, a younger priest comes along, and he's about to offer a sacrifice, and Mattathias, like a mad dog, takes a sword and kills the young priest, and then chases down the Seleucid politician and kills him too, and kind of creates a problem for himself. So if you hear that story, there's a priest who is so zealous for the worship of Yahweh that he kills a false worshiper. That should ring a light. There's going to be a light bulb coming off in your head. Numbers 25. There's a man named Phineas. It says that the Israelites went after Baal, and they're worshiping the false gods, right? I believe it's the Moabites. And so Yahweh says this cannot happen. There needs to be a plague that comes upon my people. Phineas, like a mad dog, takes a spear and he kills one of the people that was worshiping Baal and a Moabite woman, and it says that he went through both of them. Yikes, right? And it describes Phinehas as a man who was, if you're reading the ESV, jealous for Yahweh. He was jealous for the Lord and the covenant of God. And if you read other scriptures or other translations, you're going to read the word zealous. So he was zealous for Yahweh. So he had a zeal or a zeal, depending on what translation you're looking at. He was ecstatic for Yahweh's worship, and he was going to do anything he could. And he was described as zealous. Mattathias by Josephus, thank you so much, Jason, is described as equivalent to Phinehas, right? Jewish people would have seen, yes, this guy gets it. So he runs up to the hills with his sons. These are all of his sons. You have Jonathan, Eleazar, Judas, Simon, and John. And so, John Gotti? No, I said John Gaddy. And so he goes into the woods, and they start this guerrilla warfare. And his son, Judas Maccabeus, takes over once Mattathias is dead. And he becomes this general, this man who is amazing in battle. You get the sense that he has just a very strong tactical mind. He understands strategy of war, and he is defeating these Seleucid troops through guerrilla warfare, hiding in bushes, jumping out and stabbing them, that kind of stuff. Maccabeus, or Maccabee, is this Hebrew word that you get the sense it's either hammer or to extinguish. And so they call him Judas Maccabeus. That's kind of a moniker, a nickname for him, that he was hammering down the Seleucid Empire. He recaptures Jerusalem, he recaptures the temple, he cleans it out, he institutes the worship of Yahweh. So he's looked at, and this is where we get the idea of Hanukkah, right? They only had enough oil for like one day, and then they burn it for 7 days, and now we all celebrate. The Jews celebrate the festival of lights because of this. So it's because of this family. He becomes high priest. That's in yellow. If they're yellow, they were high priest at one point. He dies in battle. His brother Jonathan then takes control. He dies, and then his brother Simon becomes the high priest and becomes kind of the figurehead of this rebellion movement. Eleazar, another mad dog. These guys are crazy. They were fighting the Seleucid Empire. They're fighting these Greeks. The Greeks would come out. They try to stomp down this rebellion. They bring out these war elephants. Eleazar sees all these war elephants coming towards him, and his army is kind of freaking out, as you would if there's a giant elephant running towards you. He goes down, and in a moment like in 300, he goes and he slides under the elephant, and he starts slashing the belly of this elephant, killing this elephant. The elephant then collapses and crushes Eleazar, and he suffocates underneath. That is a true story, right? He has an elephantine death. And so these guys are wild, wild men. They have a zeal or a zeal for the Lord, right? They're excited for Yahweh's worship. Well, Simon takes control. Then you have his sons, Jai and Hyrcanus. The first takes over. And this is when a group called the Pharisees comes into existence. And so these are men who they're zealous for God. They want to obey the law of God. They want to bring about the covenant of Yahweh. They want everyone to be participating in this thing. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees are now doing this. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, we'll kind of get into it. The Sadducees are kind of the more wealthy, well-to-do, highfalutin priests who were in charge of the worship. And the Pharisees are kind of your working class people. And at this point, the Pharisees have a lot of sway. They have a lot of political power. So they have a lot of influence. Well, as we get down, you have Alexander, you have Aristobulus the first. He's not in charge for very long. But his brother, Alexander Jannaeus, becomes the king and the priest. And this makes the Pharisees very angry. There should not be someone who is a king and a priest. The priesthood should go through, if you have a particular belief, they should go through a linehood of Zadok, who was the priest during King David's time. And so he stands up and he says, I am a king and a priest. But they should be through the family of who? Who should the kings come through? David. They are David, who is the tribe of Judah, right? And these guys are not, Judahites. So they shouldn't be kings. They shouldn't be priests. But he takes in charge. Pharisees, they don't like this. So they start kicking up some dust. He crucifies 800 Pharisees. Crucifies 800 Pharisees to kind of show that he is in charge, that he is a man to be reckoned with. Pharisees then go up to the Seleucids and they said, hey, would you mind coming down and kind of getting rid of this guy because he's not a very good guy? Which is ironic because these are the exact people that they're trying to get away from. So as you move through, there's this drama. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Right now it's the Hasmoneans. And there's a lot of people, a lot of Jews that go, we don't like the Hasmoneans. Because as they move along, they started out very Jewish. Look at the names. Mattathias, Judas, which is Judah, essentially. Jonathan, Simon, John, right? These are very Jewish names. You get to Aristobulus, very Greek name. They start to Hellenize. They start to get in. As you get power, you want to stay in power. How do you stay in power? You look at the guy in the next part of the ladder and you go, hey, I'll be your friend. I'll do what you tell me to do. So they're becoming more Greek, Aristobulus, and then as you move through the timeline, you get to closer to where we are at. We get to a man named Antipas. In this point of history, around 56 BC, the Romans are really starting to take control. They take control of Palestine around 50 BC. Well, they have a client, a ruler, a guy named Antipas. Antipas says, you know who would be great to run my little plot when I die, or my sons? One of those guys is named Herod the Great. It's a good name to have, right? So at that point, now Herod is in charge. He kind of kicks the Hasmoneans out to the side because now Rome has kind of said, we will place our people who we want to be. Antipas, then his sons, Herod. Herod marries the daughter of one of these priestly lines. He marries Mariamne the first, and so he kind of is trying to get into there. The Parthians, who are the Persians, they're the Persian Empire that kind of take over after the collapse of the Persian Empire that we know of, Darius and things like that. The Parthians come in, they capture Palestine. Herod runs away, he goes to Rome, and he looks at Mark Antony, and he says, hey, I think I should be in charge. If you give me an army, I'll get the Parthians out of Palestine. Great, let's go. So they give him the title of the King of the Jews. You're looking at the King of the Jews. Have you heard that title before? Thing about Herod the Great is he is not a Jew. He is from a region called Idumea. Idumea. There's an ancient tribe that were very antagonistic with the Jews from a group called the Edomites. The Edomites. Where did the Edomites come from? Does anybody remember where the Edomites? Esau, right? So imagine, not a descendant of Jacob is in charge of Palestine, but a descendant of Esau is in charge? I mean, this is just kick me when I'm down. Throw sand in my eye. I mean, this is absolutely embarrassing. So who is in charge? An Edomite? I mean, come on. Okay, so Herod the Great comes in, he takes a Roman army, he kicks out the Parthians, and the Romans say, yes, you are now our client ruler. Give us the taxes that we ask for, and we'll be friends. We'll extend our hand of friendship. We'll talk more about this guy here in a second, but also next week as we talk about the Romans. But Herod comes in charge. He eventually kills his wife, Mariamne the first, and he kills two of his sons, who are daughters of or sons of his wife, Mariamne. Kills her, so that's why I put the skull there. She didn't last very long. But he has 3 sons. He has many sons. But he has 3 sons in particular: Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus. And if you weren't confused yet, 3 of his sons are named Herod. So now we're going to talk about Herod, and you go, who are you talking about? What are you saying? This is like the boxer Joe Frazier. No, not Joe Frazier. Is it Joe Frazier? George Foreman. George Foreman. Thank you. George Foreman who named like all of his kids George and Georgina, and he just loved himself so much that this is a George and Georgina kind of thing. He names all of his son Herod. Well, let's talk about a quick moment of geography. I'm about 30 minutes the way through. Hopefully we can get through the rest. I had an old professor who, as a business management class, and anytime he would come in with a lecture and he had a lot to say in that time, he would always use the phrase that he needed to fit 10 pounds of bologna in a 5-pound bag. And that always stuck with me. To this day, I graduated more than 10 years ago, and I had so many questions. What's a bologna bag? I don't know that. Does bologna squish? Will it form into that? And why can't we get a second bologna bag? Why can't we have 2 5-pound bags? So today I do have, in fact, 10 pounds of bologna and only 1 5-pound bag. So let's talk about geography real quick, because that'll help us kind of, once again, we're building our diagram, we're building our reference points, and I want you to understand this. So this is Palestine. Obviously you have Jerusalem. Where's Jerusalem at? Right over here, right? Here's the Dead Sea. Jordan River snakes up here. Jerusalem's right here, so this is where obviously a lot of important history happens. You have Galilee up here, so this is the Sea of Lake Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee. And you see these regions. You have Idumea, that's where King Herod is from. Judea, Samaria, Galilee, Phoenicia. I don't know, this is a different spelling. Decapolis. You remember Jesus goes into the Decapolis a couple times? There's a story in which he goes and he crosses the lake and he goes to a group of people called the Gennesarans. There's a city in here in Decapolis. So the Decapolis means 10 cities. Deca, 10, polis, city. So there's 10 Greek cities. That's why they named that there. There's 10 Hellenized, very Greek, not very Jewish cities that are in there, right? And so these are the regions. So Herod is in charge of pretty much this outlined region. You see this right here? And then his sons are going to get these regions. So this is going to be Archelaus, this yellow portion. The purple is going to be Herod Antipas. And then this green part is going to be Philip. You can kind of see that up there. This region, we'll talk about once again Rome later, so it's kind of hard to divide this out. This whole region is run by kind of the province of Syria. There was a general and a legion, a couple legions up in Syria, up in Damascus, that kind of had charge over this. But this is backwoods. This is so uninteresting. It doesn't have a lot of resources. It doesn't have a lot of political sway. It's kind of an important road point. We talked about that last week in the Fertile Crescent. But there's nothing interesting here if you're a Roman emperor. But these Jews are always causing trouble. So you kind of have to keep your eye on it. So it's not really that important politically for the Romans. So it's run by a province way up there. The guy who's in charge of it doesn't even go there that much. So this is the world that Jesus Christ lives in. And what you know is like he doesn't go very much farther than like this area, Caesarea Philippi, and he doesn't really go much further south than Jerusalem. And he goes a little bit into the Decapolis, and he goes a little bit, I mean, this guy, Jesus, I shouldn't call him this guy, our Lord and Savior, he doesn't have a study abroad experience. His world, where his footprint was, is very, very tiny. So, as we jump into this story further and further, we're going to learn about Herod, the not so great. First off, sick neckbeard. I mean, look at this guy. I mean, if that's not a look we should recapture, then I think we're losing out on culture, right? Like we need to recapture it. So I spoke with Noah. Him and I are going to be doing this later on this week. We're going to be just shaving off. And we're just going to have the neck beard. Do we shake on that? Let's do it. As I said, he's a Roman client ruler, right? He is in charge by the grace of the emperor. He is allowed to do it because the emperor said so. If the emperor were to not say it was so, it could not happen. He's a big builder. He builds a harbor. He builds some gymnasiums all around kind of the Roman Empire. He builds some stuff in Corinth. He builds some stuff in Athens, I believe. And then he also reconstructs the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So he makes the Holy of Holies twice as tall than it was. He ornates it with gold. Josephus says that in the rising sun, it glimmered like it was this shining, beautiful thing. And so if you're a Jew, you're going, okay, that's nice. This guy is kind of building up the covenant of Yahweh. But at the same time, he builds a temple to the cult worship of the Caesar, of the emperor in Caesarea Philippi. So what are you doing? Are you for the Jews or are you not for the Jews? So he's saying that Yahweh is important over on this side, but also the emperor should be given sacrifices on this side. So he's given the nickname of the fox because he's clever, he's cunning, he knows how to stay in charge, and so he's a rascally rabbit. There's a famous saying that went around during that time saying it was safer to be Herod's pig than to be his son. The Greek word, I don't even try to pronounce it. It's like hus for pig, and then huios or something like that for son. Once again, I wish Brittany Zimmerman were here to help me pronounce these words. But so this phrase it's a play on words. It was better to be his son, his pig, his hus, than his huas, right? Because if you were a Jew, you weren't going to kill pigs. But he goes around and he kills his sons. He kills his two sons from one of his wives, and so he's famous as a guy who will do whatever he can to kind of keep power. If you know the story of the Christmas story, Jesus is born, and who comes and visits him? The wise men, right? He comes and he says, and what do they announce? They say, "Where is the King of the Jews?" Who has the title of the King of the Jews? Herod does. So you're looking at a man and say, "Hey, where's your replacement at? Where's the real guy? I mean, you're in charge, but who's really in charge here, right?" So once again, we're thinking about who's in charge, who ought to be in charge, how are they supposed to become in charge. And so Matthew 2 is this story. And what does he do soon after that? The wise men go off in a different direction, and he kills everyone under the age of 2 in that region. So are we surprised that by historical facts, we know that he's not afraid to kill boys at all. He's not afraid to kill his own sons. So should we be surprised that he is going off and he's killing a handful, not more than a handful, all these toddlers who are a threat to his reign? Once again, you're seeing Jesus immediately is a threat. He's a political threat to people who are in charge. As we go along the way, this is one of our first songs, a part of my playlist that I'm building for this class. This is an old hymn by a guy named James Taylor. Does anybody know James? He's an old Puritan guy, I believe. I have to look him up the history of it. But he has a great song called "Home by Another Way." It's on the album called Never Die Young. Go out and listen. The whole album is great. But those magic men, the Magi, some people call them wise, or Oriental, even kings. Well, anyway, those guys, they visited with Jesus. They sure enjoyed their stay. Then, warned in a dream of King Herod's scheme, they went home by another way. Yes, they went home by another way, home by another way. Maybe me and you can be wise guys too and go home by another way. And so it's so fascinating that James Taylor, not a believer from what I know, who knows what his heart's condition is like, he uses this story as a way of hey, wisdom is kind of listening to, keep your weather eye on the chart on high, listen to the higher things rather than people. And so he writes this song. Go home and listen to it. It's a great, great song. Anybody know that song? No? Oh, man, I just blessed all of you. Great. I'm glad I could be a teacher in so many different ways. This is kind of the family tree and scheme and dynamic of Herod the Great. This is so outrageously convoluted and difficult. I won't attempt to try to explain it to you all right now. But as you can see, he has his wife, Mariamne the First. That's who he kills. That's the woman on the far, this kind of the red left. You can see he has other wives. He marries 10 women overall. And how embarrassing is it, not embarrassing, how sad is it that 2 of them, the names are unknown. We don't even know your name. So, has a lot of wives, has a lot of sons. He has 4 sons that we kind of know of in the biblical text. You have Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, Herod Philip, Philip the Tetrarch. He has two sons named Philip. I mean, that's when you don't even care as you're a dad. If you're naming you have two sons, you name the same thing, you're just like, I don't know, just I have another one? I have another kid? Philip, maybe. Let's go, get out of my face, right? So he names two of his kids Philip. Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, Philip the Tetrarch. These are the three sons that take control of his kingdom once the dad dies. Herod Archelaus takes over Judea and Samaria. He gets kind of the bigger chunk. He's the oldest one of the brothers. He eventually he's very bold. He's very egregious. The Jewish people hate him. They kick him out around 6 A.D., and so he gets exiled to Gaul, which is modern-day France. And in that day, it wasn't, Paris. It was, a scary wilderness with, Viking people. So he gets kicked out to Gaul. His brother, Herod Antipas, is in charge of Galilee. This is the guy that we know as Herod. When Jesus is dealing with Herod, this is the Herod Antipas that we're speaking of. Philip the Tetrarch, he's described in Luke chapter 3 that I just told you about, and that's it. We don't know anything else about this guy in the biblical context. He was a pretty chill dude. He's a pretty nice guy, right? He was kind. People liked him. He was all right. Here's where it gets complicated, and I won't be on this too long. I have this as a printout that I could have this as a PDF I could send you all, and all these numbers, it kind of gives you a brief description of what they were about. But when you know the story of John the Baptist, this guy, or Herod Antipas, married Herodias, who is Herod's granddaughter, right? So you're marrying your niece, and was previously married to Herod Philip, right? So John the Baptist says, you can't marry this woman because it's your brother's wife. This is his wife. So she leaves him to marry him, who is their niece. Yuck. She has a daughter who dances for Herod Antipas. That's Salome, right? She then marries Philip the Tetrarch, which is his grandniece. Ethan's face. Oh, these people. It is gross. It's very disgusting. And so you can kind of see all the connections. And then once the Romans kind of kick Pilate out and some other guys, Herod Agrippa, that's the guy who kills, he imprisons Peter. He kills James, the son of Zebedee. He's eaten by worms, if you remember that story in the book of Acts. King Agrippa is the one who Paul preaches the gospel to, and I believe in Acts chapter 24, 25-ish. And so these, once you're seeing this weird, strange story, hopefully, once again, you're building your diorama. You're getting context. You're seeing how these people relate. You're seeing who these people are. The Tetrarchy. Tetrarchy means the rulership of 4. There's only 3 of them. So there's kind of this estimation that Herod Archelaus got 2 portions. He kind of got the biggest one of them all. He was the oldest one. He actually, after his dad died, there was a dispute. Who's going to take what? Who's going to take what? He goes up to Rome, and he says, hey, I should be in charge of this bigger portion. Caesar Augustus looks at it and he goes, you're trying too hard. And so instead of giving him the name of Tetrarch, he gives him a lower title of Ethnarch, and then his other brothers are called Tetrarchs. He goes, you're going to get a bigger portion, but I'm going to embarrass you by giving you a lower title. So, what was he in charge of? Samaria, Judea, Idumea. You see him in Matthew chapter 2 for one brief verse. Jesus goes out Joseph takes him down to Egypt after the birth to get away from Herod. His dad dies. They come out of Egypt. And it says that he knew that Herod Archelaus was in charge in Judea. So they go up to Galilee into Nazareth. I'm guessing if you think that the dad is a nut job, you're probably thinking this guy is not safe and stable as well. So he kind of goes away. And I don't know why Herod Antipas might have seemed like a safer bet, but they go up to Herod Antipas. He's exiled to Gaul, like I said, in AD 6. And then Judea is given under the governorship of a Roman official. And so that's when eventually we'll meet a man named Pontius Pilate. Philip the Tetrarch, you don't, he's a chill dude. You really don't know much about him. He's in charge of kind of a northeastern region. Luke chapter 3 is the only time that we meet him. Herod Antipas, on the other side, this is the dark side. This is Jesus, and you have Herod Antipas, right? He's in charge of Galilee and Perea. He's the guy that kills John the Baptist because he married Herod Philip's wife, if you remember that. I just said that a minute ago. And this is the guy that questions Jesus before the cross. This is the guy that is saying that, like, are you the king of the Jews? And there's this dynamic between these two people. If you read the book of Luke, there's a handful of times where after John the Baptist is killed, he thinks that Jesus is the resurrected John the Baptist. And so he's looking at Jesus going, who in the world is this? And it says that he longed to meet. He set his face to meet Jesus. And eventually they meet before the cross in the trial. So Pilate, the Jews come up and say, hey, you should kill this guy. He says, you should talk to who's in charge of him? Herod Antipas. You go over to Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas says, I think you're innocent, but I'm going to mock you. I'm going to put you in a robe, give you a staff, and then he sends it back to Pilate. All right. Another beautiful, beautiful hymn. We're going to kind of jump into the factions, and I'm going to speed through this, and we probably will have to talk about this a little bit next week as well. There's a wonderful hymn called "I Want to Be a Sheep." I want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. And if that doesn't speak to like the triune nature of our God, I don't know what does, right? So there's just beautiful, beautiful lyrics. But there's these, this wonderful idea of I don't want to be a Pharisee, I don't want to be a Pharisee, because they're not fair, you see. I don't want to be a Pharisee. I don't want to be a Sadducee, I don't want to be a Sadducee, because they're Sadducee. Don't want to be a Sadducee. And that's all you need to know about those two groups. They were sad and they weren't fair, and that's who they were. So, no, but in reality, I want to talk to you about the four Jewish philosophies. The four Jewish philosophies, and I'm certainly going to have to kind of break this into next week, which is fine. There's 5 up here, and I'll talk to you about why, but in Josephus, once again, Josephus is a Jewish general turned into Roman historian. He kind of switches teams. He sees that the rebellion isn't going to win, so he goes over to the empire, and he starts working for Darth. And so he recognizes that he needs to explain the Jewish world to these Roman people. And so he describes 4 Jewish philosophies, which are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, right? And the Samaritans are a different group, but we have to talk about them. So there's 4 factions, 4 sects. There's actually a difference between, I just learned this week, there's a difference between a party and a sect. If you're a sectarian group, you believe that you and you alone have the truth, and then anybody outside of that does not have the truth. They do not receive whatever salvation, or they don't receive preeminence, whatever your maybe eschaton looks like. So a party is in fact a group that says, you're a part of the team, but you just we don't agree with you. You're going to get salvation. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees are what we would call a party. Does that make sense? They acknowledge each other's existence. Hey, you're going to get there probably. The Essenes, on the other part, they're a sect. They're looking at at everybody else and going, you don't got it. We got the truth. You don't got it. So let's walk through each one of these groups, because each of these groups will have some sort of connection to Jesus. And I'll talk about one of those that really doesn't, but might. So Pharisees. Pharisees are probably the biggest opponent that Jesus has within the Gospels. You're constantly seeing this conflict between the Pharisees and Jesus about various things. What's maybe one of the biggest ideas that they battle about? The Sabbath, the Shabbat, right? So like he's healing on the Sabbath. That's for a very particular reason. So as we kind of work through this grid, what was their kind of guiding truth? What did they believe in? They believed in the Torah, and they believed in kind of the prophets. They believed in the Tanakh, the Jewish prophets. They thought they were inspired, but they also believed in something called the traditions. And that's when we hear Jesus saying that you have put the traditions of man over the laws of God. And so they believed in these oral traditions. And these were laws, these were groupings of teachings that when Moses came down the mountain, he gave the written code, which is what you see in the Torah, but he also gave the oral code. That wasn't written down, but it was passed down through oral memorization. And so these were additional laws that were put into practice by Jewish people because they believed that they ought to be obeyed as well. And so they had all these commandments. There's a saying, if you read the Midrash is the collection of the oral tradition. That didn't get written down until around 200 AD, but it's believed that there's a good chance that a lot of these ideas, a lot of these laws were in place in Jesus' time. So you have the Midrash. And so there's things like, I had a quote, I forgot to bring it with me, but there's a quote of stuff like, if a piece of bread that is not tainted or not unclean touches a piece of bread that is unclean, both of those pieces are bread unclean, and if you tear apart those pieces of bread again, then the unclean portion is like a second degree uncleanness, and the other one has a third degree uncleanness. And as you read it, you're seeing this level of like exactness and prescription of uncleanness that you don't find in the Torah. And it's believed that when the Pharisees are talking about the washing of hands, they're talking about Sabbath. These are rules that were in the oral code that we kind of can see in the Midrash. And the way that they described it is that you put a fence around the Torah. So if here's the Torah, the oral traditions were a fence around it. So if you didn't break the Midrash, if you didn't break the oral code, you weren't going to break the Torah. Does that make sense? So they have all these extra rules, and that's when Jesus talks about, like, you have all these extra things that you put on other people and you don't even obey for yourself. So the question is, why in the world were they doing that? Why in the world were they doing that? N.T. Wright, if you know him as a theologian, he kind of puts the spin on it that the Pharisees aren't these like legalistic, terrible people that you and I could, we would never want to associate with. These are good Jewish people that are just trying to keep the law. And the thing that they want to do is that if we obey the law enough, if we show the Lord that we're serious about His ways, the Messiah will come and He will bring His rule and His reign. The eschaton will come, that the Jewish people will finally receive the Davidic king that they've always been longing for. So when you put it like that, you look at them and you go, I could get it. I understand it. Now, and so we as Christians, we've done the same thing in a lot of ways. These are the working class people. These people had no political power in a true sense, right? They had no ability to go in and make changes happen when it comes to the temple. As you can see, they didn't run the temple. The temple was run by the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the priests. They were the high priests. They were in charge of everything. The Pharisees ran the synagogues. These are the local communities. Anytime that there was 10 Jewish men in a city, they could start a synagogue. And this is where the Torah was read. This is where the Sabbath was kept. This is where you learned up. You were trained up as a young Jewish boy. These are the people that probably were working, might have done your circumcision when you were a young Jewish boy. And I put down, they very much would have had this idea of theonomy, that we need to get the law of God to be the law of the land. The law of God is now the law of the land. It's this idea of theonomy. Theo, God, nomi, law. And so this is not the best practice you want to have, but if I want to make an anachronistic comparison, who am I going to point out? When I say anachronistic, what do I mean by that? Anachronistic is this sense that if I take something from today and I try to place it, or I take something from the past and I try to place it in today and I try to make it a one-to-one comparison, and I like to say, well, people in the past didn't have cars, so they're like modern-day marathon runners. And you go, no, that's not what that means. That you can't compare them. It's not one-to-one. But if I were to make an anachronistic comparison, the Pharisees would have been kind of like you and I. They would have been of a reformed ilk. They would have been very conservative in their theology. They believed in something, when it talks about how does the world run? Is it run by free will? Is it run by fate? They believed in a combination. And that's as reformed people, we believe in what's called compatibilism, which is where God has his sovereignty, but also human beings have free will and they can kind of work together. So the Pharisees, when I want you to see this, when you read about interactions with the Pharisees, what I want you to see is more of yourself than some sort of strange religious person who is hyper legalistic that you have nothing to relate to. These people were trying to do their best to get the Word of God into the lives of people. These were the respected religious leaders in their city. People like the Pharisees. They were, the way that I describe them, I kind of thought of them, they're kind of like Tea Party Republicans, right? They're grassroots. They're fighting kind of the establishment. They're trying to get their beliefs into it. They're not really in charge anymore. They used to have a lot of influence, the Tea Party did. Now they really don't have that much influence as much as they did anymore, but they're trying on the grassroots level to make their belief known. So the question is, who's in charge? Well, Herod is in charge. We don't want him to be in charge. Who should be in charge? Yahweh. How will we get Yahweh to be in charge? Listen to how I'm saying that. How will we get Yahweh to be in charge? Through extreme adherence to the law. Through obeying the law, Yahweh will send the Messiah. So and anybody that's going to break that, anybody that's going to do that, that's not okay. We're gonna try to make that not happen. I'm going to do the Sadducees and then we'll finish the rest of this next week. The Sadducees, as you can see, believe in only the Torah. They don't believe in the oral traditions. So they're not thinking about the same things of like the washing of the hands. They did ritual washing. They did ideas of baptism. If you went into the temple, you had to take a ritual bath. But they weren't worried about cleanliness and clean rituals as much as the Pharisees were. They believe that the Torah should only be interpreted by the priests. So they're very much a Catholic understanding of how do we interact with the Word of God? Only the priests can interpret it. The Pharisees said anybody can interpret it. Once again, these are our Protestant forefathers in a weird, strange way. And if you're hearing that as a Christian, you're probably getting itchy. But there's a reality to that. These are the wealthy elite. These are your Washington, D.C. elites, right? These are swamp people. And I say that, hopefully that's not too offensive. But when think about it, in our political context, when you say that, you know exactly what I mean. That's why I'm saying that. These are the establishment. These are people who are entrenched. These people do not want the Pharisees to be in charge. They very much are, they're Jews, but they're saying, hey, Rome can be in charge as long as we can worship Yahweh. We'll do a little bit of participation in how we rule things. They're free will, so they're kind of your, what's the word I'm looking for? Calvinist, Arminian. These are Arminian, kind of. These are strange people. They're Catholic, Washington, D.C., Arminians. So once again, anachronism isn't great, so you shouldn't be doing it all the time. They think that worship is centered around the temple. They believe that sacrifices are important. And the Pharisees would have as well, but they're believing that the way that a Jew could live a good life is surrounded in his day-to-day living, in his synagogue living. And once again, they're going to try to participate with the political system to try to get what they want, their ends met. That's all that I'm going to do for right now.